the part 3 of organizational communication, we will be discussing about challenges in organizational communication. What are the various challenges in organizational communication? The challenges could be in the organizational structure and its outlook, environment of mistrust in the organization, choosing the wrong time and audience, or ethical issues. So, organizational structure and outlook, environment of mistrust, wrong time and issues of ethics, which these factors will lead to breakdown in communication process. Lack of proper planning, unclarified assumptions, semantic distortion, as we have already discussed in the previous in the lecture 2, that is organizational communication part 2, semantic distortion, poorly expressed messages, communication barriers in the environment, loss by transmission and poor retention, poor listening skills and premature evaluation, impersonal communication, distrust, threat and fear, insufficient period of adjustment, information overload. How does an organization overcome these barriers? Overcoming communication breakdowns. Set the goals of communication in advance. What you want to convey to the receiver, that should be appropriately planned, and the goal should be decided so that we can move according to the plans and the message can be effectively conveyed. Use of proper language. How language, what type of language should be said to which audience, what is the level of education or cultural background of the receiver's power, position power, so that the language can be appropriately used in the context, so that there is no barrier or the person receives the message effectively. Improving the sender's credibility, the sender, who is sending the message and what is the credibility of the sender should be established. Encourage feedback. Any message would be more effective if there is a feedback. Feedback is generated, feedback is effectively conveyed to the source, so that there is always an improvement, there is a scope for improving the message effectively. Develop a trusting climate, a climate of trust, a climate of camaraderie, a climate of say better good relationship should be there, and select an appropriate channel. Avoid evaluative judgment. We should not be judgmental in either in evaluating the audience or in evaluating the message. Listen to the entire message rather than just rushing with a conclusion or just to half interpret the message. It is better to understand the entire message. Provide appropriate feedback. Active listening is one of the important steps in improving or overcoming communication barriers. The process of tuning is carefully to the sender's message, or tuning in carefully to the sender's message and responding accurately to the meaning behind the message is referred to as active listening. Active listening helps in encouraging echoing and keyword repetition and reflecting on what has been said. So, if you look at what is active listening and what it constitutes, active listening has 3 parts. One is sensing, that is sensing, evaluation and responding. What is sensing? Postpone evaluation, avoid interruptions, maintain interest. Evaluation means empathize with the subordinate, empathize with the receiver, organize information in a meaningful manner, responding to the receiver, responding by showing interest, clarity in the message. Active listening will help in overcoming barriers, receiver specific barriers. How you sense, how you postpone evaluating, do not evaluate, avoid any interruption in either in the environment, interruption in your thought process, and continue to maintain interest, empathize with or give try to sense make what the source has conveyed, and organize the information effectively conveyed by the source. So, these factors constitute active listening. The next is potentially correct. What is potentially correct communication? Communication which is so concerned with being inoffensive. That means we have been discussing about how communication is more effective and when there is no offensive language used, when the language is inoffensive, that meaning is very simple and meaning is not lost or which is free of any kind of expression. So, this message is effectively or potentially correct communication. Certain words like stereotypes, intimidation and insult will distort the message. In a highly diverse workforce, as we know that business environment is highly dynamic in a present contemporary business environment, the workforce is also, there is a diverse workforce, because as we know that diversity leads to creativity. So, organizations have a cultural mix, gender mix, the organizations have a mix of employees of diverse age group. So, there are different generational cohorts and these differences or diversity leads to conflict. So, the conflict can differences in the workforce or workforce diversity, there are chances of miscommunication happening. So, in a diverse, highly diverse workforce, this is that is very problematic. So, certain language we have to take care of cultural sensitivity, gender sensitivity and age group differences, so that effectively language can be so that an appropriate communication can be planned. Garbage becomes post consumer waste materials, quotas become educational equity, women become people of gender, like this how we put forth our or how words are being conveyed. Such non-standard sanitizing of potentially offensive words can reduce the clarity of messages. When we make the words we put forth the message in a very cautious manner, or when we put forth the words most effectively, there are less likely chances of miscommunication. Feedback, how feedback is important? Feedback is very critical in communication and how you do it is equally important. Never give destructive feedback, it kills the morale of an employee. Give a constructive feedback, understand the sender and his sentiments and give a feedback in a most appropriate manner, so that the message can be corrected, so that there is no miscommunication. Constructive feedback are essential and it will help in generating workplace, or it can be more energetic, it can create positivity in the workplace. How to manage information overload? As we have discussed earlier, a large amount of information can be a barrier in the communication process. So, how does a manager, how do we manage information overload? Solution 1 is increase information processing capacity, learn to read faster, scan through documents more effectively and scan through the or remove distractions. Time management is also an effective way for reducing information overload. Temporarily work longer hours. The next solution is reduce information overload, buffering, omitting and summarizing things. So, improving interpersonal communication, there are again some theories behind, as I already stated that we have two dominant theories in the communication process. One is transaction analysis and the other one is Zohari window. How does transaction analysis help in reducing conflict in the workplace or improving communication effectiveness? What is transaction analysis? Transaction means exchange, as we know, understand the very purpose of transaction is to exchange meaningful information. Transaction analysis is a method that helps two persons communicate and behave on the job in a mature manner by understanding each other's motives, each other's positions. As we all know that each individual has different states, each individual is in different states of mind, like the parent ego state, adult ego state and child ego state. If you assess one individual, there would be differences in his ego states, and that interferes in the transaction between two individuals. And we will be understanding, we will be analyzing the transactions that happens between individuals from and from these three different ego states. The ego state of one individual and the other and the ego state of another individual when there is a complementary transaction, when there is a cross transaction, which one can lead to effective communication, which can distort communication process. So, as we have discussed about the ego states, there are different positions, life positions. We will get back to these life positions before we will understand what is this ego state. Improving interpersonal communication through transaction analysis. The focus of the discussion is what is an ego state, how ego state and how different individuals have these ego states. Ego states of two individuals can interfere in the communication process and can lead to miscommunication. But our purpose is to understand when can there be effective communication, when there can be ineffective communication. How does the ego states interfere in the transactions? The parent ego state, that is the ego state as an individual picks up while in the early socialization process we know that an individual learns behavior from his parents as well as parent parent figures. Parents are the direct they are influencing the behavior of a child, and parent figures like elder brother or uncles and or any other family member who influence the behavior of a child. So, when during the early socialization period a child learns behavior from his social background, from his family, so family members. So, this helps in forming the ego states, the parent ego state. Adult ego state is a rational and say behavior which is reflected through thoughts and feelings which are direct response to how the individual behaves in a most rational manner. Child ego state is something which child ego state is the behavior, thought and feeling replayed from the childhood. As an individual in a childhood, how he or she behaves, that behavior is also there somewhere or the other, consciously or unconsciously it gets reflected, and that is how is described as a child ego state. So, what we understood is improving relationship through transaction analysis. We will do some more analysis about the ego states. How does a parent ego state, what type of ego states are constituting in the parent ego state, what behavior is reflected by the parent. We know that there are two types of, if we categorize, there are two types of behavior dominantly exhibited by the parents. One is a nurturing parent, another is a critical parent, a dominating parent or a mentor, parent as a mentor. So, nurturing parents generally have a criteria, they have a characteristics of nurturing the child. They show thoughtfulness and affection to the others, and a critical parent would be dictating, would be ethical, they would be guiding the child through the rules and regulations, and they would be very idealistic. So, these are some dominant, these are two broad domains of the parent ego state. A child, an adult ego state is which will help the person to behave more in a most rational manner, think, judge and make decisions objectively. The focus of the adult ego state is how an individual behaves in a most rational manner by thinking judiciously, judging, thinking, making decisions in a most rational manner. Child ego state, as we know that a child can exhibit different behaviors. The child can exhibit a rebellious behavior, can be obedient child, can be a free child who speaks and behaves without any or irrationally, a very impulsive behavior. So, free child is one who can act instinctively and impulsively. The very curious and creative child, an intuitive child, one who is very curious and intuitive, would be mostly not very obedient, and an adapted child is one who would be obedient and trusting others, and a rebellious child will be very defiant with a defiant attitude. So, these are mostly the behavior exhibited by children. by exhibited by any individual. So, based on these ego states, we come to a discussion on the life positions. If we look at the transactions that happen within two individuals in an interpersonal communication between two individuals. So, the two individuals having dominant parent, adult and child ego state, the transactions can happen at different points of time differently. In the workplace, mostly parent to parent ego state, adult to adult ego state, child to child ego state. These positions can be construed as life positions. I am not okay, you are okay. I am not okay, you are not okay. I am okay, you are not okay. I am okay, you are okay. These are life positions. From these life positions, we can analyze the transactions happening between two individuals as complementary transactions and non-complementary or crossed transactions. I will give you some examples. Parent to parent ego state, say two colleagues interacting, or say one say senior manager and his subordinate. So, senior manager generally tries to give advices to the subordinate. The subordinate is at receiving end, and so the subordinate receives the messages, and the advice given by the senior manager is like a nurturing parent giving an advice to an adult individual. So, it is a kind of a transaction between one individual to another individual. Adult to adult is when a discussion happening in a most formal manner, adult individual, when there is a discussion which is happening and people discuss in a formal meeting in a most rational manner, they take it very seriously, they obey by rules and regulations. There is a discussion both between both the parties in an adult to adult transaction. It is a kind of complementary transaction where there is most likely the chances of miscommunication is not there. But when you are giving an advice to an individual and the individual, the receiver or the audience answers in a childish manner, in a playful manner, there are likely chances of the source or the sender of the message getting irritated. So, what we are concluding here is when the transaction, when you rationally when the message is sent rationally, judiciously or in a most efficient manner, the message should be also reflected, or the receiver should receive or send the message in the same manner, in a rational and logical manner, rather than being playful or rather than advising. So, this will lead to miscommunication. And next we will be discussing about how we can improve relationship in the workplace, another theory called Zohari window. What is Zohari window? We will be discussing, and how Zohari window can also lead to effective communication. What is Zohari window? As you know that conflict can distort or can reduce morale of employees. Conflict in the workplace can reduce performance of employees, can reduce creativity, can reduce the knowledge sharing or or reduce innovation in the workplace. So, overall what we have understood, the communication, as we have already said, communication can make relationship, develop interpersonal effective communication can build effective relationship in the workplace, and any kind of miscommunication or say lack of trust or can distort the relationship in the workplace. And as we know that there are various means through which, or because of the presence of barriers, environmental barriers, because of the presence of say receiver specific barriers, sender specific barriers, and the source of genesis of barriers as we have discussed, there are various barriers existing in the organization and which can distort the communication process. We must be careful how to make an effective communication. So, in Zohari window what we will be discussing on it is just like a 2 cross 2 matrix, where on the one hand, on one axis known to self, known to others. On the other axis we discuss about what is known to self and known to others. So, on one axis there is a disclosure, on the other axis there is a feedback being discussed, and then overall if you see there are 4 quadrants in the matrix. One is unknown to others and known to self, and unknown to others. On the another axis unknown to others and known to others. So, when you plot together you will see that there are four important points. One is public, blind, private and unknown. These 4 quadrants are known as what is known to others and known to self is an open or public space as seen in the open or public space. What is known to others and what is unknown to others is a blind space. Blind, that means the person who is sending a message is not knowing some of the problems in the communication is not known to him, certain behavior is not known to him, but known to others. Unknown to self, unknown to others and known to self is a secret or private window or the private quadrant, where the person knows about the strengths or weakness of his and which is not known to others. The 4th quadrant is hidden, or it is also called unknown quadrant, where it is unknown to self and unknown to others. So, conclusively we have 4 quadrants in Johari window based on 2 cross 2 matrix. The one axis of the matrix, the axis defines what is unknown to others and known to others. On the other axis, known to self, unknown to self, and based on this we have 4 quadrants: public, blind, private and unknown. So, what is the interpretation of this? As we have already seen that a feedback can help in improving the communication process. So, in the most effective communication happens in the open or public space, where what you are conveying is known to self and it is also understood or interpreted effectively by others. The second, that is blind, is unknown to self. You do not know when what you have conveyed has some kind of say some noise in the process of communication which is not known to self, but has been understood by others. The third factor is, so a feedback can be given in such a case so that the source understands and overcomes the barriers in the communication process. The secret or private window is one where the factors are unknown to others, but known to self, that an individual knows about his strengths and weaknesses, but others are not knowing. So, suppose you are working in a team, a group of people, and you know your strengths and weaknesses. You know that you are if it is an innovative team, you are, or it is a problem solving team, or any other team with a different objective, you know your own strengths or weaknesses. Suppose an individual knows that he is very good at developing creative messages, drawing, he is very good in some strengths, he is good in planning. So, he has to tell others, which others in the team may not be knowing. So, the individual has to disclose his characteristics, his strengths and weakness to the other members, so that the team can effectively utilize his resources. What is unknown? Unknown is completely unknown or hidden is a quadrant, is a window which is not known to anybody, not known to self. So, there is a exploration, self exploration, self realization will help to improve the communication process. We discussed about the barriers, we discussed about the genesis of barriers or noise in the communication process. We also discussed a bit about how to overcome those barriers in communication, individual specific and organizational specific actions, so that an organizational barrier can overcome. And now we also discussed about 2 dominant theories of communication, broadly transaction analysis and Zohari window. Zohari window conclusively we discussed. There are 4 quadrants which have arrived through the definition, broad definition of 2 cross 2 matrix. On the one hand, we discussed about what is known to self, known to others, unknown to self and unknown to others, and based on that there are 4 open, blind, secret and hidden windows. And now moving on to the next discussion, that is advantages of effective communication. What is the advantage of effective communication? There is no substitute or disadvantage to good communication. Communication will help in improving better interpersonal relationship, better information availability, better decision making, better company image. It will help in improving productivity, high employee satisfaction, and it will also help in recognizing the bottlenecks. So, conclusively or summarizing the importance of communication and its managerial implications. Less employees are uncertain, the greater their satisfaction. Good communication reduces uncertainty. Communication is improved by choosing the correct channel, being a good listener and using feedback. Potential for misunderstanding in electronic communication is higher than for traditional modes. There are many barriers to international communication that must be overcome. So, what we have discussed so far in this, we have discussed about the barriers of communication, the genesis of noise in the communication channel. We discussed about the personal specific barriers and organizational barriers. We discussed largely about the various personal specific barriers, and then we discussed about various theories and of communication like Zohari window and transaction analysis, how these 2 theories help in bridging or improving the communication process, and what are the advantages of effective communication in the workplace, how it helps in improving better relationship, employee satisfaction, better workplace, better information availability, and largely bridging the better corporate image, better decision making process. So, there is no substitute for effective communication, and for communication to be for improving the communication, we have to have an effective feedback mechanism, a good listening skill, and also a correct channel or appropriate channel to be adopted. With this, I would like to conclude this lecture here. Thank you.